There are battles you can win with guns, and then there are battles you can only win with shadows. The Ekumeku weren't just warriors. They were a people who took an oath so strong, it outlived bullets, fire, and even death itself. And when the British Empire tried to break them, they discovered something terrifying. You can destroy villages, you can starve families, but you cannot kill an oath. This is part 2 of the story of the Akumiku, the ghost army of Anioma. To betray the Akumiku was to betray the ancestors, the land, and your own blood. The blood price, but oaths carry a cost. Each fighter knew that once they swore, there was no going back. Families left behind often never saw their sons again. Many fighters vanished into the forests, becoming shadows that lived only for the next ambush, the next battle. Mothers whispered their sons' names into the wind, never knowing if they were alive or dead. Wives raised children alone, their husbands swallowed by the cause. It wasn't just courage that fueled the Akumiku, it was sacrifice. Whispers of fear the British soldiers began whispering among themselves. They said the Akumiku could not die, that the oaths made them invincible, that bullets slid off their skin, that ghosts walked beside them in the dark forests. Entire regiments marched with unease, terrified not of the ambushes, but of the silence. No one knew how many fighters there were. No one knew where they would strike next. It was as if the very land itself had sworn the oath. The unbreakable network by the turn of the century, the Akumiku oath had become more powerful than any weapon. It created trust where fear should have lived, unity where betrayal might have broken them. The British had rifles. The Akumiku had faith, secrecy, and blood. And in a war fought in the shadows, that made all the difference. But the Empire wasn't done tightening the noose. And soon, the Anioma oath would be tested against fire, steel, and the full weight of Britain's wrath. Chapter 8. The Empire Strikes Harder. By 1900, the British Empire was no longer treating the Anioma resistance as a local nuisance. The Akumiku had embarrassed them one too many times. Ambushes had wiped out patrols. Trade routes were disrupted. Tax collectors went missing in the forests. London demanded answers. And so, the colonial administration responded with a single decision: crush the Akumiku once and for all. The scorched earth British officers brought with them a strategy they had perfected in other colonies: scorched earth. Entire villages suspected of aiding the resistance were set ablaze. Huts, barns, shrines, all reduced to ash. Fields of yam and cassava were uprooted. Wells were poisoned. Livestock slaughtered in ditches. It wasn't about fighting warriors anymore. It was about starving them, breaking the people who sheltered them. In just a few months, Anioma looked less like farmland and more like a wasteland. The guns of the Empire, then came the weapons. Maxim guns, early machine guns, dragged into the forests by sweating soldiers. Heavy rifles, crates of ammunition, bayonets that gleamed like fangs in the sun. The Akumiku fought with muskets, cutlasses, spears, and traps carved from wood. They had bravery. They had the land on their side. But the British had firepower Anioma had never seen. Ambushes that once scattered colonial patrols now ended in massacres. The sound of the Maxim gun tore through the forest, a roar like thunder, spitting bullets that shredded trees and flesh alike. The shadows of Anioma were bleeding, breaking the silence, but even with the firepower, even with the burning villages, the British still couldn't kill the oath. Captured warriors refused to talk. Villagers, even under the lash, would not betray the hiding places of the fighters. Mothers stood before soldiers and spat in their faces rather than reveal their sons. It drove the British mad. How could a people so outgunned still resist, still fight, still refuse to bend? The shadow strikes back despite the devastation. The Akumiku adapted. Instead of large ambushes, they split into smaller units, striking fast and vanishing deeper into the forests. They built decoy villages, dug pit traps, and poisoned food supplies left for the British troops. One account tells of a British convoy ambushed so suddenly that not a single soldier survived. The message was clear: Even with Maxim guns, the empire was still vulnerable. Every battle was a wound, but every wound carried a lesson. The Anioma fighters were learning to fight not just with weapons, but with time. The price of defiance, yet the price was heavy. By the early 1900s, thousands of Anioma men and women were dead. Children starved in the ashes of their homes. The forests filled with widows' cries. The British called it pacification. The Anioma called it survival. The oath still held. But the empire wasn't done. They were preparing something even darker, even more ruthless, a strategy meant to shatter the Akumiku once and for all. And so, in the silence after fire, blood, and thunder, one question remained. Would the oath of the Anioma endure the full weight of an empire? Or would the shadows of Akumiku finally fall? Chapter 9. The Siege of Anioma. By 1902, the British had decided that enough was enough. No more scattered patrols. No more piecemeal fights in the forests. If the Akumiku wanted to live in shadows, the empire would drag them into the open. And so began the Siege of Anioma. The Net Titans' the plan was brutal in its simplicity. Surround Anioma, choke it off, and grind it down. Columns of British troops marched from Asaba, Onitsha, Benin, and Ibadan, closing in from every side like a tightening noose. Checkpoints sprouted on the roads. Food supplies were seized. Markets were shut down. Anyone caught carrying yam, cassava, or palm oil was accused of feeding the rebels and punished on the spot. It wasn't just a military campaign. It was starvation, isolation, and fear turned into weapons. A town under watch in the heart of Anioma towns, the air itself felt heavy. Drums no longer beat at night. The marketplaces, once alive with women bargaining and children laughing, now lay eerily silent. Every face could be a spy. Every neighbor could be a traitor. British soldiers patrolled the streets, rifles gleaming, while hidden informants whispered names into their ears. Those accused were dragged away, flogged, or sometimes never seen again. The siege wasn't just on Anioma's body. It was on Anioma's soul. The warriors' desperation, the Ekumeku refused to surrender. From within the forests, they launched desperate strikes. A patrol ambushed here. A storehouse burned there. Messages carved into tree bark, warning the people, the oath still stands. But the siege was working. With every passing month, food grew scarcer. Children with hollow eyes lined the villages. Mothers boiled weeds to feed their families. The warriors themselves grew thinner, weaker. And yet, still, they fought. The betrayals, but hunger does what bullets cannot. Under the crushing weight of starvation, a few began to break. Some whispered secrets to the British in exchange for food. Others revealed hidden paths to the forests or pointed out the homes of suspected leaders. Each betrayal cut deeper than any sword. One captured warrior spat in the face of a British officer before execution, shouting, "It is not the gun that kills us. It is hunger." But hunger cannot kill an oath. Even in betrayal, there was defiance. The fall of strongholds one by one. The strongholds of Anioma fell. Idumujagboko, Anakolona, Igbodo. Each village that resisted too long was surrounded, shelled, and burned until nothing remained but smoke rising above the trees. The forests that had once been shields now became cages. The warriors were running out of ground. The British pressed harder, determined to crush not just the fighters, but the very memory of resistance. But the shadow still moves, and yet, even in the ashes, the Akumiku remained. Whispers traveled faster than bullets. Messages moved along secret networks. A drumbeat here, a chalk mark on a tree there, a coded song sung in the market. The oath had not broken. Not yet. The siege was bleeding Anioma dry, but the shadows still stirred. The fight was not over. It was only entering its darkest hour. Chapter 10. The Last Stand. By 1904, the war had dragged on for over a decade. The Akumiku had been battered, starved, hunted, yet they still refused to kneel. For the British, patience had run out. The order came down from Lagos, then from London itself. End it. Burn the roots. Salt the earth. leave nothing for the shadows to rise from again. The gathering storm, the British gathered their largest force yet. Hundreds of armed soldiers, backed by machine guns, artillery, and African auxiliaries loyal to the crown. Their target was clear, the surviving heart of Anioma resistance, hidden in the forests near Ekumeku and Ibusa. It wasn't just a battle. It was meant to be an execution. The Akumiku prepare in the forest clearings. The Ekumeku warriors gathered for what they knew might be their final fight. There were no cannons, no rifles, no polished uniforms. Just machetes, spears, dane guns, and charms bound to wrists with red cloth. The oath was renewed one last time. Old men with broken voices spoke it. Young boys barely able to hold a blade repeated it. Women who had lost sons to the war whispered it through clenched teeth. We are the shadow. We do not break. Even in death, the oath remains. The clash the British came at dawn. The forest shook with thunder as artillery shells tore through the trees. Machine gun fire rattled like angry gods, mowing down warriors before they could even rise from cover. And yet, the Akumiku charged. Barefoot fighters rushed into bullets with machetes raised high. They darted between trees, striking, then vanishing like smoke. Women carried baskets of stones and poured them down on patrols from the treetops. Every inch of ground was paid for in blood, but the Empire had brought too much firepower. The collapse by nightfall, the forest floor was a graveyard. Bodies lay scattered among the roots, red cloth soaked dark. Smoke rose from villages set ablaze. The British advanced with brutal efficiency, torching shrines, executing suspected leaders, and scattering the survivors deeper into the bush. The Akumiku had fought with every breath, but the last stand had broken their spine. The Shadow Army had bled out into the soil of Anioma. But not the end, and yet something lingered. Even as the British declared victory, even as the surviving towns fell silent under colonial rule, whispers refused to die. Children were still taught the oath in secret. Old women still sang the songs in low voices at night. The forests of Anioma still carried echoes of the fallen. The Akumiku had lost the war, but they had carved their defiance into the bones of the land. Legacy of the shadows, the British thought they had crushed a rebellion. What they had actually done was plant a seed. Decades later, that seed would grow again, in the struggles for independence, in the voices demanding freedom across Nigeria. Because the Ekumeku proved something the Empire never wanted the world to believe. That even in the face of impossible odds, even when the guns are louder, the chains heavier, and the hunger unbearable, a people bound by oath can outlast an empire's fear. The shadows of Anioma still move, and their story refuses to die. If this story shook you, wait until you see what came next. Because the Akumiku weren't the only ones who defied the empire. At the end of this video, you'll see a link to the next chapter, another forgotten piece of history that the world tried to bury. Click it, and let the shadows guide you deeper. And of course, subscribe, because every week we bring back the story's history tried to silence.